Gunjeet is a managing director in the Technology Investment Banking Group at Jefferies and global head of semiconductor and electronics. He has 26 years of experience in investment banking and technology. Prior to Jefferies, Gunjeet was with Needham and Company as co-head of merger and acquisition. At Needham, he completed over 100 M&A sell-side and buy-side transactions, IPOs, public financings, and advisory assignments for public and private companies. He also worked at Intel Corporation for 7 years with positions in strategic marketing and microprocessor design. Gunjeet holds a BE in electronics engineering from MS University in India, an MS in electrical engineering from Virginia Tech, and an MBA from University of California, Berkeley. So, ladies and gentlemen, please help me to welcome Mr. Gunjeet Baweja.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. So how many here are working in an AI startup? And how many of you would like to start an AI startup? Everybody. So in case you're wondering what Jefferies does, we are not a semiconductor company, I think you figured that out. But we help entrepreneurs, especially when you get to liquidity, or if you're getting to an IPO, or for doing offerings. The firm is a global firm. We have offices in over 17 countries in about 30 cities. In China, actually, we have a partnership or exclusive partnership with a bank called Bank of China, which I think all of you know. But today I'm not going to be talking more about Jefferies, but I'm going to be talking about where are the investments going? How is it that you can actually think about joining a startup and thinking about liquidity so that you can actually make money on a personal basis to figure out what AI is all really about? I think a lot of people have already talked about why AI now. So we'll skip some of those slides. I think it's clear that there is a lot of compute power and there is a lot of amount of data which is actually bringing AI together now. I think the key question is what kind of applications you come up with and what kind of startups do you come up with which can enable successful companies. And there is really, to put that in a perspective, as you're thinking about startups, you really have to think about what is the real problem that you're solving and when will that really get adopted. Because that has a direct implication on how those companies get funded, how those companies, how much of capital they raise, and what time that exit might happen. So I think the first thing that has already been going on for a long time is the internet companies using AI. That's why you've seen the growth in the data center. This is in the early days why you've seen the NVIDIA stock go up as much as it has. The second wave is business AI. This is starting to be talked about. It's like, how do businesses use the data that they have intelligently? Now, we've all been talking about this high compute and high amount of data. The key thing is what hardware solutions, the semiconductor solutions that might be needed to solve these problems. The third one is perception AI. I think this is, you've seen the early stages of image recognition. I think it's in early stages. We have some amount of self-driving cars, so you've got to be careful. They're still not at level 4, but that's the other aspect. And finally, it is full autonomous AI, where you get to a stage where people talk about maybe there's automated cars, there's robots that are running the world. It's a scary proposition, but we'll see how that all works. But the key thing is that all of these technologies will need hardware or semiconductor chips to run. So the key question is, what kind of solutions would be needed by all of these topics that have been talked about, and what are the opportunities for the entrepreneurs out there? Obviously, China is playing a big part in this, and so is the rest of the world. the amount of investment that China's making is tremendous. I think what that creates is an opportunity for the entrepreneurs even in the US to get investment from China, which we've been seeing increasingly, and also a lot of companies in China that are getting a lot of investment, but it is going to be a big competitive force. I think some of the biggest funding that has gone into AI has been in China, so obviously this is an important topic. This is always an interesting cycle. I was at an AI conference a few weeks ago, and someone had an interesting chart of how many AI conferences were going on right now. And it's interesting to see that AI is right at pretty close to the peak, so it's not a surprise that the CASPA organizers chose AI as the topic. But that's also something to be careful about, because what you see is, if you see VR, it's very difficult to go get funding for a VR company right now, while 2 or 3 years ago that was not the case. So I think as you're thinking about the timeline, if you're thinking about starting a company or thinking about an exit, thinking about not assuming that this hype is going to last forever is an important point, because things can change very quickly. AI is going to be here to stay, but the key question is, what kind of company can you create that can really benefit from this hype? So what is interesting is, I think the previous speaker also talked about this, is like there is not one startup that can really go after AI, which makes it both interesting but also complex. So there are numerous areas that you can go apply this technology into. The key thing for the startups is going to be is, which area do you pick? What kind of solution do you come up with? Is it a hardware solution? Is it a software solution? And is the product that you've created, can you really sell that many chips to create a viable business? And that's going to be a key point as you think about startups in each of these areas. What is interesting is that people are claiming that the AI semiconductor market, both at the edge and in the cloud, is going to be growing. Now, we've looked at a lot of applications, and there's a lot of different players that are trying to claim what is the right kind of solution to go after this really large market. 33 billion is based on a lot of different applications. So the key question is going to be whether it's a startup, is it an established company, or who gets that big revenue base. And I think that the estimations are that the growth is going to be more in the cloud, but what is also interesting is the growth of the semis in the edge. And I think people have already talked about all the various applications that could happen. And these are pretty large markets that are emerging, which actually creates an interesting time for semiconductors in terms of just proliferating chips in almost every device that exists, but a lot more intelligent chips which have a higher ASP and therefore more value. So when coming down to the silicon side, the key question is, what's the right solution to solve all of these various AI problems? And that's where it's an interesting challenge for a lot of the AI companies out there. We've seen a lot of AI companies come in with specialized processors that are going after more of the edge devices. We've seen companies go after the cloud solutions, but you also have GPUs where you have companies like Intel and NVIDIA that obviously NVIDIA has a lead over there right now. And then you also have FPGA that can play a key part in terms of a reconfigurable architecture to solve these problems. So as you're thinking about startups and thinking about liquidity and all the effort that you're putting in, you've got to think about around which continuum can that AI problem really be solved, and what's the right hardware to run your solution on. This is more, the public company universe today is pretty limited. I think that in the early days, NVIDIA got a lot of traction, and AMD from its graphics on the data center side, where a lot of the AI things happen. You had Xilinx and some of the FPGA like Altera gain on that, and you had Intel with its compute and other things that were talked about before. But you don't see too many startups in here. And we haven't seen an AI startup go public yet, but that's where both the opportunity and the risk is in terms of the kind of companies that you're competing against. I think I mentioned over here, these are some of the larger companies. You've got to think about it in the context of what is the solution that these are providing and what's unique that you can create as a startup that can compete against this in an effective manner. So it's no surprise when you have a fast-growing market of, let's say, 40 billion, you have a lot of money going into startups all over the world. It's actually interesting that the investment in semiconductors was down to like 80 to 100 million about 5-6 years ago. And as you said, people were a lot less interested in semis, but I think given a number of applications growth, the amount of investment that has come in is significant. But what this also means is that there are a lot of startups that you have to really watch out for, and not only in the US, but around the world, a lot of them even being in China. This creates both an opportunity, but also some amount of concern. The opportunity is that if you have an AI startup, given where we are in the hype cycle, it's easier to raise money. The key question is, will every company make it? And what kind of success so many AI startups will have? Does the world really need 20 different AI startups with all the, given the market that we're talking about? I think that these are some of the companies. They're really well funded. I think, and each of these are going after the various elements out there. So there's no dearth of startups, and all of them have very innovative and interesting technologies going after all the market segments that we talked about. And I think the investment has obviously picked up significantly in this space. This is obviously just an eye chart, but essentially what it means is it's not just only the hardware, but it's creating a lot of software. But it is a big ecosystem that you really have to sort through as you're thinking about it from a startup point of view. And the key question is, what is the precise problem that you're solving that can play in that marketplace? One thing which is interesting is that there has been a lot of exits in this area. That's what obviously Jefferies as an investment bank that we help companies with. More of the acquisitions so far have been on the software side, where people were trying to figure out what are the right algorithms. There have been some pretty interesting exits, like if you look at Mobileye or Movidius or Nirvana, and the valuations that maybe Intel has paid for those companies, because they really were ahead and created very unique technologies. But it's still early going in terms of too many hardware transactions right now. But given the amount of funding that has come in, that's going to be an interesting field to watch out for as to what happens in the coming years. So here's where I conclude my talk. I think that we are in a very interesting time. We only have the public companies that are dominating AI today. But at the same time, we see a lot of different startups and a lot of activity. But we really have to be careful in terms of being a startup, what kind of applications are you going after? What is the unique differentiation that you're solving to get a successful exit? And hopefully one of the startup companies over here will be a public company competing with those companies. Thank you.
Thank you, Gunjeet. So we have Brandon to present a token of appreciation to Gunjeet Baweja.
其实这个 AI 这是软件，对 hardware 来说是软件，最重要的就是数据，所以这是一个第二个，这个拿一个摄影师来。